Posted by you/Bailey the Nerd. Mad Margaret the beginning. Today I will be introducing you to a human being who is a curious mixture of entitled and insane. My first landlady, Mad Margaret. About 8 years ago I moved out of my parents' place practically a few months after returning from foreign exchange. My family is supportive, but pretty firmly believe in being autonomous/self-sufficient. So, I looked for a place to live near my, at the time, girlfriend, now fiancée. She lived on the outskirts of a larger city and finding low rent would be difficult. Eventually I find a room listed for about $500 per month, which is almost criminally low for the area, but I was a foolish child and did not pick up on that first red flag. The second red flag came when I called to query about the room. My soon-to-be landlady made sure to emphasize that she was a pastor and a minister. That no amount of Satanism or evil thoughts would be allowed in the house. I am, myself, completely non-religious. So, I foolishly believed that this would be perfectly fine. I explained that I was a student and would be doing student things. An agreement was made, and I moved up shortly thereafter. Upon moving in, Mad Margaret was pleasant if a little eccentric. She showed me to my room, my mum helped me unpack, and Mum and I left to get me some starting groceries. Upon our return, Mad Margaret showed me my shelf in the fridge and my shelf in the pantry. Mum and I load our stuff up and Mum drives back home. Shortly afterwards, Mad Margaret apologized for leaving some of her groceries on the pantry and helped me move her stuff to a different shelf. This left all of my groceries stacked up in the middle of my shelf on the pantry, because I didn't feel the need to spread them out. This is very important. My first morning in my new room, I wake up around 8 a.m. to knock 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 knock. Me, hey Margaret, what's up? Mad Margaret, it's not going to work out, you need to pack your things up and leave. Me, I'm sorry, what? Mad Margaret, you need to leave. It's not gonna work out. Me, well, I paid first and last month's rent, so I'm here for at least 2 months. What's going on? Have I offended you? Mad Margaret, I don't need any of your feng shui, voodoo, devil crap in my house. Note it was not her house, she was subleasing. Me, I don't recall doing any feng shui voodoo devil crap, what do you mean? She beckons that I follow her and stomps off to the kitchen, where she flings open the pantry and points accusingly at my shelf. Mad Margaret, this feng shui shit. Me, what's wrong with my groceries? Mad Margaret, how you organize them, you have them all stacked up in the middle like you're doing some feng shui crap to curse me and my child. Me, no, I just left them there after we moved your groceries off my shelf yesterday. You had your stuff on the sides, so I put my stuff in the middle and then we moved your groceries. Mad Margaret, Humphrey, I've got my eye on you. That, my friends, was day 1 in this house. I lived there for a little over half a year. If you guys are interested, I can provide more epic tales of this mad woman. She was entitled, nuts, and pretty racist. Now on to part 2. Mad Margaret Part 2. Her righteous defense against the shaman and warlocks. If you are just joining us for this wonderful tale, you are more than welcome to read part 1. However, I am an easygoing person and will not require it. I shall provide abridged necessary information. TLDR background: my first landlady was a little bit of a nutjob named Margaret. I was just moving out at the age of 18 and going to school near my, now, fiancé. Margaret is a self-described minister and ridiculously religious. She provided suspiciously low rent for a room, and I seized it only to be accused of Satanism on day 1 because of how I organized my groceries. On to the current story. One of the mistakes I made very early on as an independent adult was to regularly offer my technical/electronic skills to anyone and everyone. It makes me feel cool and smart to fix things for people. I made this mistake with Margaret during my initial phone call setting up the rental situation. The next day after she accused me of Satanism, based solely on how I organized my groceries, she called me over to the living room. I braced myself for another rant about my evil voodoo ways, but instead Mad Margaret asked for my help. She asked about a way to get her camcorder to stream live to the internet. I figured this was an opportunity to get on her good side, so I take the camcorder in hand and start fiddling with it, as well as her computer to see what our options were. This was in 2013, so live streaming was nowhere near as commonplace as it is today. While playing with her outdated equipment to see if what she wanted was even possible, she began to explain why she wanted to live stream. You see, Mad Margaret has a hobby. Mad Margaret enjoys preaching daily to an empty room for about 3 consecutive hours, give or take an hour depending on her mood. I later learned that this was the safest time to enter/leave the house, as she would not stop unless God himself showed up to tell her to shut up. Margaret began telling me how desperately important it was that she do this daily. The following conversation, while possibly not identically worded, as it has been 9 years, has not been exaggerated in the slightest, nor is she being misrepresented. This is who this woman is. Mad Margaret, thank you Bailey for helping me get this fixed up. I knew it was the right choice letting you live here. Did she forget that she accused me of Satanism yesterday? Me, no problem, I just really enjoy fixing things. Mad Margaret, do you know why I do this, preaching to her living room behind a lectern, every day? Me, because you're a minister? I was desperately hoping this was a short conversation. Mad Margaret, because I fight daily for the protection of the world and all the good godly people here. Me, Margaret, you know there are people on the opposite side, people who work with the devil to try and bring ruin to the world. Every day there are shaman out there begging their evils to prevent the sun from rising each day. Me, oh. Margaret, if I wasn't here preaching God's word, they would win, the sun wouldn't rise, and we'd all die in a world of darkness. Yes people, I am not exaggerating, this woman takes credit for the sun rising each day. Me, well, thanks, I guess. Mad Margaret, each day I speak out against these evils. You know, the other day I saw thousands of crows on your college campus. I knew they were sent by evil priests to stop my sermons. They're an evil that collects around the godless students at the college I was a student of. Me, I'm pretty certain that crows just have some kind of migration pattern up here in the fall. They do, we get tons of crows every year. Margaret, no, it's them students, I'll tell you. I had one of those Asians staying here last year. I tried to tell him about God and Jesus, but he tried to put an evil on me for it. Me, that's unfortunate. Mad Margaret, he had this shrine with Buddhas and evil figures. He tried to use his magic to curse my son's flight, to crash the plane and kill him. Me, did his plane crash? Mad Margaret, no, because I stopped it with my sermons. Me, neato. Mad Margaret, I've had other students from the college that you go to come here. All of them were evil. So many of them smoked the devil's lettuce and let Satan take over their body. Terrible influences on my other son. Later I would find out her other son lived in a building next door and was hands down the biggest stoner I have met in my entire life. Dude was so chill and tried to redirect his mom from harassing us any time he was there. Me, I'm sorry. Mad Margaret, how's the camera coming, honey? Can we get my videos online? Me, you know Margaret, I think that this camcorder and desktop are a little too old to be capable of doing that. I'm afraid you'll just have to keep the recordings yourself. Following this I left for my girlfriend's house as quickly as possible. Every day for the next month, Mad Margaret would attempt to pester or harass me into fixing her up to be live online. Each time I would make an excuse to not get trapped into doing so. TLDR, crazy on-site landlady I had took credit for making the sun rise each day, demands thanks from everyone, and demands I find a way to stream her ranting/raving online. Now onto some comments before the rest of the updates. Posted by Jurassic Park fan 190. How old were her kids? I feel so bad for them. OP responded with, the one I met was in his early 20s, a couple years older than me at the time. Tall guy, dreads, the man smelled like a Willie Nelson concert. Super duper chill, seemed tired beyond his years any time he existed in the same zip code as his mother. He was the younger brother. Posted by Realistic Noise 2. I'm actually surprised that you survived and hopefully got away from the woman. So, being a petty person, I would so show up in a devil suit and cab saying, hey, I'm here to pick you up personally, do you want to take the scenic route? OP responded with, I'm not gonna invite that kind of conflict in my life. She's nuts, there's no benefit to messing with her. Also another tenant was already doing that, which is Mad Margaret and the tales of other tenants. Realistic Noise 2 responded with, I see, I just meant for me I'm a petty person to do something like that if I know that I can get out of there, but if you can't at the moment or you don't want to invite drama I understand. I'm just saying you'd be funny if somebody in a double costume would show up to the religious nut's house and do something like that. Still good luck if you do have to deal with her because I think she's just using religion as a way to lord over people so she can feel superior. OP responded with, I'm long gone from her house, haven't seen her in years. Though, I imagine she's probably still in the same place apparently, she's been a menace to the town for a while. I know this because when I moved in and went to get a change of address form from the post office, the guy at the counter handed me a second one after he read the address and told me I should consider getting out of there ASAP. I'd mess with her if I thought she was just playing things up, but there is very definitely some kind of certifiable psychosis in that woman, and as much as I want to mess with her, I'd feel bad for harassing the mentally ill. Realistic Noise 2 responded with, "Oh, indeed, and legitimately if she is mentally ill, hopefully she can get the help she needs. I just thought that she was just some holier-than-thou crazy person that just demanded people to worship her because she thought she was great, but now that you just posted this, makes me realize maybe there's more to it, but still if the whole town knows about her, hopefully, she could get some help if something does happen in the future." OP responded with, "I'm certain it's a little bit of both. She's 20% crazy, 80% holier-than-thou and entitled. I'll tell the funny stories and laugh about the situation, but I don't want to seek things out further. Primarily because I'm 99% certain I don't want to find out why she keeps getting her driver's license taken away." Now on to part 3. Mad Margaret Part 3: The Tale of the Possessed Dog. For those of you who need an introduction to this epic adventure, feel free to read Part 1, Mad Margaret the Beginning, and Part 2, Her Righteous Defense Against Shaman and Warlocks. Otherwise, I shall provide a brief background in case long reads aren't your forte. TLDR background: I moved out of my house when I was 18 to go to school near my girlfriend, now fiancée. I found a suspiciously cheap room in the area with a landlady who turned out to be nuttier than squirrel shit. Said landlady accused me of Satanism because of how I organized my groceries, then the next day took credit for the rising of the sun. Note, this was several years back, and she is no longer my landlady. On to today's episode. Margaret is, by my estimation, at heart somewhat lonely. How do I know this? Well, 2 reasons. 1. If she saw me or one of the other 2 tenants, and she wasn't preaching to an empty room, she would immediately attempt to hold us hostage in conversation. Seriously, no amount of hums or willies would dissuade her from going on and on and on and on and on about how everyone besides her is evil, and she's a saint. 2. After 1 week where she wasn't able to successfully pester me or the other 2 tenants, she out of nowhere adopted a dog. Now, it's been nearly 10 years, so I cannot remember this dog's name. But I do remember the dog. It was a small curly-haired white dog. And it was a sweetheart. This dog, when I met it, was jumping up and wanted nothing but love and affection, which, it seemed at first, Margaret was going to provide. She pets the dog, told her that she was a beautiful gift from the Lord, a great matchup, right? Well, before I elaborate much further, it warrants explaining the layout of the house. Mad Margaret's Madhouse was at one point in its history an assisted living home. It had 3 bedrooms on the first floor, 1 for each tenant, and a whole second story dedicated entirely to her grand regal radiance, Mad Margaret. It is also worth mentioning that Mad Margaret is, if you hadn't figured it out from the other 2 posts, extremely mistrustful of, well, everyone. So, she made a point that her fluffy white angel never be downstairs. Back to the story. For the next few days, I am, as always, careful to leave during Margaret's midday sermon to no one. As that is the only time, she won't attempt to trap anyone in conversation. I noticed a bit of a trend. She kept talking about the cleanliness of God, and how the devil was an agent of chaos and filth. Eventually, about a week after Mad Margaret got the dog, I was unlucky enough to return home while she was in the kitchen. She caught me? Mad Margaret, Bailey? Fuck. Me, what up, Margaret? Margaret, we need to get rid of the dog. We? Me, oh no, what's going on? Margaret, it's possessed. I think by Satan himself. Me, what do you mean it's possessed? Margaret, this, forgive me, damn dog is intent on ruining my godly house. It's bringing filth into my home. Me, filth? Margaret, it keeps defecating and urinating in my room. We need to get rid of it. Me, oh no, it wasn't potty trained? Margaret, those heathens at the shelter assured me that she was. Me, is it not going to the bathroom when you let it outside? Margaret. At this point it hits me. I had seen the dog precisely once when she had initially gotten it. I'd leave the house pretty frequently, but one would assume my path would cross with her pottying the dog at least once, right? Me, Margaret, you have been letting the dog outside, right? Margaret, I want this demon gone. Sigh. Me, what do you mean, you want it gone? Margaret, I want to take it to be put down. Abso-fucking-lutely not. Me, absolutely not Margaret. Return it to the shelter. Margaret, but it's possessed, the heathens at the shelter tried to put a demon in my home. Me, Margaret. The dog is not possessed. You never let it outside. Where the hell is it supposed to go to the bathroom? Do you expect it to stand up on the toilet, do its business, and flush? Margaret, I let it out just the other day. Me, Margaret, how often do you go to the bathroom? Every couple of days? No, find me the number of the shelter, I'll call them for you. Margaret, I don't have their number. Me, I don't believe that. You better get your son to help you get this dog back to the shelter, because if I find out you had this dog put down because it crapped in the room you left it locked up in, you're gonna have a lot more to worry about than demons in this house. I will call the cops, Animal Protective Services, anyone and everyone. Margaret, fine. I'll get my son to help me return this damn demon. The last I saw the dog, she was loading it up into her SUV, and her son was driving. She had lost her license several times over. So, I'm fairly confident the dog was taken and returned to the shelter she got it from. For the next couple of days, she was surprisingly less talkative to me, though she definitely looked at me with some suspicion. I don't think she ever stopped believing that dog was possessed. I'm glad I was able to save it from her. TLDR, Mad Margaret believes the first sign of a dog being possessed by Satan is it being unable to operate a toilet on its own. Proceeds to tell me she wants to put a dog down for shitting in the room it's been locked up in for a week. I convince her to return the dog to the shelter. Now on to part 4. Mad Margaret Part 4, Other Tenants. Today's epic tale. I have mentioned, minimally, in other installments of this story that there were other tenants in Mad Margaret's house. To be precise, there were 2 Sad Steve and Devilish Dan. Note, names changed because I have forgotten their names at this point. I'm not the type of person to really know my neighbors, and our paths seldom crossed, because we'd all keep to our rooms for obvious reasons. Both of these men were a fair bit older than me, 40s 50s, and both were semi-recently divorced, only living with Mad Margaret to be closer to their kids. 2 divorcees, both alike in dignity, in Fair City where we lived, where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break new shenanigans. Source me, ripping off Shakespeare. We'll start with an introduction of Sad Steve. Sad Steve was a very clever, if very depressed man. In the months I lived there I shared 2 to 3 conversations with him. He was a set worker for a local TV show about a cop who can see supernatural fairy tale things. He was very sad about the way things went down in his life and wanted nothing more than to be there for his kids. He gave me a Mickey Mouse coffee mug I still own to this day. Now, as far as Mad Margaret was concerned, this man was a ripe target for impromptu sermons and semi-frequent snide remarks. The first time I spoke with Sad Steve in the kitchen, after chatting for a bit, Margaret came out and I very quickly finished making my food and scurried back to my room, unfortunately abandoning poor Steve. Steve was stuck in that conversation for a good 2 hours. The man either had the patience of a saint, or just wouldn't will himself to exit the situation. She told him all about how God's got a plan for this, if you're righteous your life won't suck, that it wasn't good. The look on his face at the time broke my heart, and I resolved to throw myself between Mad Margaret and Sad Steve any time she started focusing on him. It felt like I was leaping on top of a grenade each time, but I'm fairly emotionally resilient, and honestly, I thought too much exposure to Margaret would drive Steve to a bad place. I wish I had more to tell you about Steve, but that's about the long and short of it. Now, the other tenant there is someone that you've probably all been dying to hear about, Devilish Dan. Why do I assume your collective interest in Devilish Dan? Well, this man has acted out and personified just about every action you guy recommended I take. Dan hated Mad Margaret, and Mad Margaret hated him right back. These people were archenemies in the most literal sense possible. Where I saw someone to be avoided for the sake of avoiding unnecessary inconvenience or drama, Devilish Dan saw a religious nut who could be messed with. Devilish Dan would laugh devilishly. Devilish Dan would outright claim to be Satan there to torture her. Devilish Dan would get into shouting matches with Mad Margaret, because he apparently does not see the futility in arguing with crazy. Devilish Dan would slam his door and claim to be the Antichrist. Devilish Dan was surprisingly childish for a 50-plus-year-old man with graying hair. While I disagreed with his tactics, his presence outside of his room was much appreciated, because Mad Margaret would fixate on him, because he'd actively antagonize her, which made any time he was roaming the house a safe time for me to go about my business unperturbed. A brief example of a typical interaction between the two. Dan, are you trying to curse my son? I saw you looking at him with evil eyes when you were getting out of your car. Of course, I was. What? Why? Why do you attack my family? Because I'm the devil incarnate, you stupid bad word. Loud angry rambling. After a particularly bad night between the two, I was roused from my computer science homework by particularly loud slamming down the hallway. I decided to wait a bit for things to calm down, then took my laundry to the laundry room, which was right next to Devilish Dan's room, down the hallway. I find Mad Margaret's practically Rastafarian one son in the hallway staring at Devilish Dan's bedroom door, laundry in hand, shaking his head. On Devilish Dan's door, in white paint, in large horror movie font was the message. Don't threaten me. Good Lord people, I wish I had taken a picture. Mad Margaret's son had come over to pick up his laundry out of the dryer, only to find the message on the door. He yelled to Mad Margaret, "Mom, I'm serious, you can't be doing this shit anymore, you're going to get in trouble," which was met with some shrieking about how Devilish Dan was the devil. I quickly got the lowdown from the son. Devilish Dan doubled down on his devilish depiction. Mad Margaret, met with much misanthropy, momentarily melted down. This was also, apparently, not Mad Margaret's first time using this means of communication, so her son was concerned she'd be met with the police. Now, for those of you who are cheering on Devilish Dan, I do want to take a moment to clarify this is not necessarily just how he acted with Margaret. The man was a pretty rude narcissist, pinning the blame for all of his life's woes on Mad Margaret and his ex-wife. When I was looking for another room to rent, I met two lovely women in the neighborhood who had rooms, one of which I did move into, and both had also had applications from Devilish Dan. Both of these women made it very clear that they did not see him in a favorable light, and that he had been angrily ranting about how everything bad was Margaret's fault, taking no responsibility for himself. Ultimately, at the end of this tale, I remain concerned for Sad Steve, and I hope he did well and got out of there. I feel little pity for Devilish Dan and assume that if he remained there for much longer one would have murdered the other. Personally, I'm just glad to have left. TLDR, also living with Mad Margaret was a sad man, and apparently literally the Antichrist. Hijinks ensued.